Hello, BookTube. All right, we're on to part 3 of our 11K Q&A. We're going to start off with Jonas Zanzibar. Is Murakami dude bro lit? Not really. No, not really. He doesn't do many of the things that dude bro lit writers have to do in order to maintain their position in the church. He's more inscrutable to me than that. I understand dude bro lit right down to its DNA, and there are times when I don't understand what Murakami is trying to do at all. So I wouldn't lump him in. Although there's a lot of crossover. There are a lot of dude bro fans who like him. Why do you disable likes and dislikes on your videos? Well, first, I think it's a cheap metric. It's brainless. I always hit the like on any YouTube video that I watch before a single word has been said, to demonstrate that you made this thing for free and I'm watching it. That gets a like no matter what, whether I agree with you or not. But I disabled the likes on my own because A, it's a kind of a dumb metric. It doesn't require that I explain why I like what I'm doing that anybody else does. And B, it became obvious to me in the first year of my channel, that I had a couple of dedicated psychopaths. Trolls, actual psychopathic people who have a serious mental condition, are a danger to themselves and others, who hate watch this channel to such an extent that they will immediately dislike anything at all that comes up on the channel, regardless of content. They'll dislike it immediately. And I realized after a while that they were getting off on seeing that, and I don't want them to. I don't want psychopaths to see any kind of product of their own insane work. So I disabled the likes and dislikes on the videos so that they couldn't see them. And for a while I thought, okay, well now they'll only know that I can see their likes and dislikes. But the YouTube Studio has changed over the years to the point where when I look at YouTube Studio now, I don't use the app of YouTube Studio. I use the site on my laptop. And when I look at YouTube Studio, I would have to go rooting around to see the likes and dislikes on a video. I certainly don't see it ever when I'm just looking at the videos, and I never do go rooting around, which is why I don't know my own analytics. So I feel confident that those psychos are still rapidly downvoting every single video that I make, but I don't even see it anymore. No one sees it anymore, which is the yardstick of insanity. They're doing it because they are in complete freefall. They don't have any control over what they're doing, even though no one's seeing it, even though no one knows. They're literally howling into a void and they don't care. But I don't want to be any part of that at all. I want your comments. I don't care about thumbs up or thumbs down in my reviews or on my videos. But you had another question, didn't you? Yeah, what do you think about Crash Course Literature Series? I like it, of course. I like it. It reaches a huge audience with lots of enthusiasm. The trend that I talked about, that some polls and statistics show that the pleasure reading is declining, if anything's going to arrest that, it's going to be things like Crash Course Literature. So I'm happy to have them. I wish there were more of them. Let's see here. Maximus Stetich says, Steve, with your opinions on philosophy being known, what singular text would you recommend for the most intellectually arrested and masochistic of us? Well, if you read some of the dialogues of Plato, I guess with Aristotle as the founder of Western philosophy, some of the dialogues of Plato at least are structured dramatically. The Symposium, for instance, or the Apologia. They're structured dramatically so that, yes, they have a whole bunch of philosophical bilge water pumped into them, but they're also stories, basically stories. I guess those would be maybe what I would suggest. Isaiah Armstrong says, congratulations on 11K. My question is this: what is the best way to get into poetry? I am an English student who loves reading the classics, but most poetry just hasn't done it for me. I do have some poems that I enjoy, but my problem is that I don't like having to, or haven't been taught to, work at understanding a poem. I love the process of working to understand a novel, but poems can frustrate me with how elusive they can be. It feels like trying to understand an in-joke that doesn't translate well to someone who is on the outside. How can I meet poetry halfway? Well, essential to you meeting poetry halfway is that it be willing to meet you halfway, and most poetry after the beats is entirely in jokes. It is entirely inward looking. It doesn't care whether you understand it or not. It's not going to meet you even a fifth of the way. That sort of stuff can be just dismissed. And I have been arguing for 70 years that it should be dismissed. It's garbage. It's totally self-referential. Little red light, footstep, mustard stain. And all of those things have deep psychological meaning to the author, as would come out in their therapy session. But no one knows it. The audience doesn't know it. And there's no attempt to explain it or contextualize it. To such so-called poets, I say, take a long walk on a short pier. But in terms of complex poetry that isn't like that, Paul Muldoon, for instance, maybe some Derek Walcott, it's just a matter of working at it. That's all. There is payoff there. Absolutely there is. It's just a matter of finding the references, digging through them, putting in the work. There's actually an audio recording of William Butler Yeats saying that it took a great deal of time to create this poem, and I mean it to take a great deal of time to understand it. Okay, fine, fair enough. Let's see here. Thomas says, have you ever taught children? Elementary, primary school? No. Leo Percara says, do you have a couple of recommendations on your favorite investigative journalism books or favorite journalists that wrote great books? There have been a lot of journalists who wrote great books. In contemporary terms, I always recommend on this channel Sarah Kendzior and Jared Yates Sexton. And their books are really, really good. Very good to read. Disturbing, but very good to read. They're disturbing because they are the foremost chroniclers of America's slide into authoritarianism. And that's a depressing feeling, especially if you're old enough to remember when America was a free country and liked freedom and hated authoritarianism. They chronicle a gigantic sea change in that social fabric, and their books are tremendously good. Let's see here. William Fett says, I recently read The Frontiersman by Alan Eckert. Me too. Found it very enjoyable. What do you think of his Winning of America series? I think it's really good. I recently got a couple of his Winning of America books at the Brattle and reread them for the first time in 35 years. And there's a lot of literary value, a lot of historical value there. It's a very smart writer. I would very much like a whole shelf of Alan Eckert in hardcovers with dust jackets. So I don't know that I'm ever going to find that, but I recommend them very much. Meaty stuff. Matthew L. says, what are your thoughts on George Steiner's controversial little novel, The Portage of San Cristobal of A.H.? I've never liked it. It's just a total misfire for me. And I apologize if you've commented on this elsewhere, but did you see the new Ken Burns documentary on Hemingway? I did. I made the time to watch it. Excellent as all Ken Burns stuff is. If so, what did you think? Did it raise any thoughts or considerations for you on the man or his work? It certainly made me more sympathetic to the man. It gave me a greater understanding of Hemingway as a man, elements of his biography that I wasn't as familiar with. I think sort of voce underneath the whole endeavor of that miniseries was, maybe not conscious on Ken Burns' part, was an attempt to soften the estimation of Hemingway's written work by supplementing it with lots of knowledge about Hemingway as a man, sympathetic knowledge. And I don't believe that should ever happen. I don't really care how hard a time Hemingway had at the country club or in his married life or with his children. I do care, of course, I care in a species fellowship, but as a critic, I care about what he put on the page. And I'm not willing to really pull my punches with the stuff that's on the page because of the hard time he was going through in his life, obviously. So I thought maybe there was a tiny bit of dirty pool going on the miniseries, but it was wonderful. How I wish, I mean, it'll never happen, but how I wish that Ken Burns would do a documentary just that lovingly detailed, just that long, about every writer. Just every writer. just do every writer. How wonderful. Imagine something like that about Washington Irving. Or Phyllis Wheatley. Anyway, I liked it, is the answer. Babette Marjan says, congratulations, well deserved. Is it really, though? What do you think of authors in review spaces? There are no such things as spaces. Okay, I know that you're not being lazy here. You're just using the idiom of the day, but I can't stand spaces. Seems like little foam furniture areas where children go, and they are very much viewed that way in the 21st century. This is my space. But I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Author in review spaces. Did you have any unpleasant encounters with authors because of your reviews? In the context of this question, and in the context of the larger discussion as it's been happening in the last month out in the larger bookish world, I'm gathering that review spaces here means places like the review section of Amazon's or Goodreads. And those aren't review spaces. They are just spaces. No one lays claim to them. There are no rules. There is no doorman behind a velvet rope or anything like that. I have had unpleasant encounters with authors, mostly in exchanges of letters. And it's a bad idea, as I've said on this channel many, many times. If you are an author and you are tempted to respond to something that a critic has said in a public forum, don't. Don't. Take a stiff drink, take the dog for a walk, do whatever you have to, but don't write that response. Don't do it. And I'm not saying that because of this noxious 21st century discourse about how that's bullying to the poor reviewers. For God's sake, there isn't an author born who can bully me. I'm talking about it because it's very unprofessional. It can't help but look bad on you. The only circumstance in which it is even remotely permissible is if the reviewer has got a fact wrong. If the reviewer is saying, well, naturally this biography of Sinclair Lewis is favorable to the author because the author of the biography is his great-granddaughter, and you're not, then you can correct that fact. But even then, get a friend to do it. Don't do it yourself. Don't respond to critics under your own name for any reason. It is always, always a bad idea. But I have had encounters with touchy authors who found out how to get in touch with me and sent blistering letters. Because I have in my reviewing life, this may come as a surprise to you, I've sometimes been rather brutal with authors who are waste my time and want to waste your money. I get very protective about your time and money, and some of them don't take that well at all. So I just the other day got an irate email from a representative of one of those authors saying that your review was critical, and I guess that's understandable, although I don't think you read the book. They always say, I don't think you read the book. As if there's only one conclusion that could be drawn if you did read the book. But this person went on to say, but however, your review also contained what looked like personal animus, and I just wanted to tell you that's probably not a good look. Yikes. Read the room. I gave them my standard response. Your friend should find a new profession. Anyway, let's see here. As Leapy Channel says, I'm watching your older videos and just saw a book that looked interesting. The Last Man in Europe. It's about Orwell's book 1984. So I wonder, what did you think about the book? I liked it. There's an Orwell industry. There's a little Orwell industry, little side books about him, including minor biographies of him. Not many of them rise to the level of must-reads. You don't have to rush right out and read The Last Man in Europe. Colo 1546 says, congratulations on 11K, thank you. And then number one, was Stephen Jay Gould ever a customer at a bookstore you worked at? No. But I encountered him many times in Harvard Yard. The first time I encountered him crossing Harvard Yard, I was crossing Harvard Yard and just said to him, hi, Mr. Gould, I recognize you, and I read your column in Natural History. You never miss it. And I want to tell you, your last column was really good, although it had a detail that I couldn't argue more strongly with. And he stopped. He had an armful of books. Stopped, said, oh, what's that? What bothered you about it? Genuinely interested. I don't know why. Friends of mine at the time said, there's an affect that you give off that maybe you're not aware of, that you're not just some lunatic, and that you're fairly well read. It's amazing to me. My friends have said for years that it's pretty obvious pretty soon when you're dealing with someone who's well read. I don't know if that's true. I've certainly seen things hiding under false premises many times, but one way or another, he did that with me. And we had a conversation right there in the yard where we argued a point. There was a particular point that he made about birds that I thought, the point might be right, but it doesn't flow from the grounding that you gave it. And it was fun. We were amusing each other. There was that vibe that you sometimes get with people that, although you're just meeting for the first time, that if you'd met 30 years ago, you'd be old friends by now. There was that kind of a vibe. I love that when I get it. I always hope for it in everybody. And subsequently, we met often crossing Harvard Yard or in some Harvard bookstore where I would run into each other. And the conversations were always fun, but he was never a customer of mine. No. Wouldn't that have been fun? Oh, my. Question number 2, your thoughts on the Shazam / Captain Marvel name issue. Is it right for a character's name to be his secret power word? Well, no, it's dumb, and it's like most things in the world. It's dumb. It's the result of a lawsuit because uh, DC Comics is not legally allowed to use the term Captain Marvel, even though that's the character's name, because Marvel Comics bought the rights to Captain Marvel, so they have to come up with another name for Captain Marvel. It's lucky for them the character was also synonymous with the magic word that gives him his powers, so at least the name recognition didn't dip. But for 30 years, 40 years, the character was Captain Marvel. For a long time in those 30 or 40 years, he was the best-selling comic book character in the world. Outsold Superman on a regular basis. People knew that name. It was just when Marvel got a chance to snap it up legally that they did. And they're always going to continue to use it. They're never going to let it revert to DC Comics. But it's dumb. It's absolutely dumb. And it introduces logistical problems that used to exist in the old Captain Marvel reality, not with Captain Marvel, but with Captain Marvel Jr. Captain Marvel was a successful character, and he would say the magic word Shazam, and that would transform him into Captain Marvel, give Billy Batson superpowers. And eventually he spun off other characters, including Mary Marvel, who also said Shazam and got Captain Marvel-type superpowers, and Captain Marvel Jr., who was a super hottie teenage boy who did not say Shazam. Instead, he said Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel told him, say my name, and you'll get your powers. And he did, and he becomes a superpowered super hottie, and he became Captain Marvel Jr., which means that he was the only superhero in the history of the genre who couldn't say his own name. if he stopped a giant robot and the cops and the crowd said, who are you, stranger? Who do we have to thank? He couldn't say, I'm Captain Marvel Jr., because he'd no sooner get Captain Marvel out of his mouth than he would transform back into Freddie Freeman. People would say, who's this newspaper boy? We wanted the hero. Where'd the hero go? He couldn't say his own name. That is ridiculous. And now that logistical problem has been imported into the whole of the line because of the stupid legal thing. Anyway, Casper Heilman says, what do you think of the Sharing Knife series by Lois McMaster Bujold? This is the first I have decided to read, and I am wondering if I should venture forth further. Well, taste will vary. Bujold has never done it for me. Books always seem boring. And very much including this series. So certainly she has a legion of fans, so maybe you'll be one of them, but it doesn't work for me. Quentin Ferrari says, 2 questions. What are some verse forms that took you a while to understand and appreciate? I've been struggling to understand haiku lately. Do you have any quick advice for how to approach them? I've never had all that, not that I know of, all that much of a problem with any verse form, but in terms of understanding and approaching haiku, there are many, many different ways. First of all, there are a ton of great anthologies to read. But also, haiku, unlike a lot of other kinds of poetry, it's fairly easy for you to readily start trying it yourself. And that will give you a great understanding of what it is and what it isn't, how hard it is, and the subtleties involved in conveying some of the effects that you can do in haiku. I would strongly suggest that. Write a haiku every day. Work hard at it, and it will yield a lot. I had a year where I did that. It was a lot of fun. Nick Piccarilli says, what do you think of The Given Day by Dennis Lehane? It's great. It's just a great historical novel. Violent. It's very violent. Those of you who are maybe a little averse to that know what you're getting into, but it's just beautiful. Best thing he's ever written. Do you have any favorite historical novels set in Boston? Well, that'd be one of them. Robert Parker also wrote a book, All Our Yesterdays, set during a Boston police strike that was fairly good. And of course, there's The Last Hurrah by Edmund O'Connor, which the city is never named, but it's pretty clearly Boston. Jose Mercado says, congratulations on 11K. How would you rate books by Gay Talese? He's never been a favorite of mine. It always struck me as either the prose is either flat or very mannered. And what about Ann Beatty? Same thing. I know she has fans, maybe more than Gay Talese does now, but her books have always seemed to me to be just very dutiful. None of them has ever moved me, and that always bugs me. Let's see here. Joe Buckley says, your thoughts on 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley. Don't get me started on Jane Smiley. And Richard Russo, okay, that's a different story. He's generally talented. Worth your time to read. Not brilliant. Not a great writer, I don't think. I don't think that he will earn the accolades that will definitely be showered on him when he dies, but good. Always reliably good. The Peglar paper says, I wonder if you've had any personal contact with sharks, whales, or other interesting marine creatures. Well, I wouldn't be here if I'd had a personal encounter with a shark, now would I? Although I came close. Once upon a time, I came close to encountering a shark in the water. I've had encounters with whales, yes, because I've spent a lot of time on Earth's waters instead of its land masses, and a great deal of that time in small single hull vessels with one sail. And if you're just making your way along or even just idling, whales will come up to visit you. They'll come up to take a look at you, figure out what you are. Or in the case of, for instance, kayaking or sailing in the Pacific Northwest or somewhere else, killer whales will come up to you en masse, and there's a little more point to their curiosities. They are apex predators after all, so they're curious about you, but they're also curious about whether or not they want to eat you. And whales typically are not that. They will in the open ocean, they will just come up because they're curious. They just don't know what you are. They're still going to go on their way. You're barely going to register a fraction of their attention, but they're definitely not going to eat you. Not even going to think about it. And dolphins. Impossible not to encounter dolphins when you're in a situation, when you're out in the water like that. I've encountered them many, many times. And they also are just incredibly curious. They don't stick around long. Usually they don't stick around long. It was always my yardstick when I was on the open ocean. That if a large denizen of the ocean, a whale, a shark, a dolphin of some kind, if they do stick around, that's a bad sign. You don't want that to happen. That's unnatural. And it almost never did, so I was very happy about that. Very much, especially including large sharks. If a large shark shows up near you and you're just a little skiff of a thing, and it sticks around, and it's longer than your vessel, that is bad. That is very, very bad. That didn't happen often, though. John Myers says, I happened to catch a Jeopardy question today about Bill Buckley, William F. Buckley, referring to spy novels he wrote late in life. I didn't write them all late in life. I enjoyed reading his syndicated column and wondered if his talent with words transferred to writing good fiction. It is good. I wouldn't rate it any higher than that. But a lot of his stuff is worth reading, yeah. Would you recommend any of his novels? Yeah, if you're, I wouldn't recommend you go out of your way, but if you're at a used bookstore that has one for cheap, or flea markets and yard sales, if we ever get those back, he was a staple. His books are a staple of places like that. Try one. Spend 50 cents on it and see if you like it. His register never changed in 60 years of writing. So if you like the register of one book that you find, you're going to like a lot of them. So give him a try. Definitely, it's not worthless. It wasn't a vanity exercise. M3 Industries says, I've recently become obsessed with the Library of America anthology since you showed us the E.O. Wilson anthology. What do you think of these books in general? Do you own any volumes, and have you recommendations of similar publishers for those of us who want to build a library? The Library of America volume is great, and it's a fantastic way to build a library. Just fantastic, because you're getting so much good stuff. I love them. I think they're fantastic. The books are built to last forever, which not every publisher does. And I also tend to like how minimal the editorial interference is. You don't have somebody's long palavering introduction. You don't have a ton of pandering notes. Instead, it's very minimal. The works are very much put forward. And the Library of America is awful creative. They do some awful creative stuff. Their book on the writings of the American Revolution, their 2-volume set that was wonderful. They did a 3-volume set of, or 4 volumes was it, of writings of the American Civil War year by year. They've done box sets of mysteries and science fiction. They are well worth it. If you become obsessed by them, the best way that you can show your obsession to them is to subscribe. Speaking for Library of America for a moment, that's the best thing for them, is to give them an operating budget. The only reason that I don't do it, I would subscribe to them in a heartbeat, except that I tend to get them, as you saw, I tend to get them in the mail, so from Library of America. But otherwise, and there have been many years, even though I'm getting in the mail, where I've still been tempted to subscribe to them. Just because, like with magazines, subscriptions tend to be the thing that people overlook that is really, really the most helpful for any organization. It's pretty pricey, I think, to subscribe to the Library of America, but worth it. Worth scrimping to do it. Let's see here. Erica Thompson says, do you have a recommendation you could give me for a good biography of Mary of Tech? There seems to be quite a few, and I don't know where to begin. Okay. off the top of your head, can you think of anything notable that happened to Mary of Tech in her life? Did she maybe get a promotion from being Mary of Tech? Probably only duly respectful to refer to her as Queen Mary. You know, we're not talking about or about her getting elected secretary of her local Kiwanis club. She was Queen of England, so she stopped being Mary of Tech when she became Queen of England. But I'd say James Pope Hennessy. He did the official biography, but it's still really good. It's still really, really readable. And what was it? Anne Somerset did a book called Matriarch that was also really, really good. Pete Pensive said, "Can you give me any tips on calming down angry dogs when you meet them in public or out on a walk in the middle of nowhere?" I can't give you any tips of stuff that I do because I wouldn't advise you to do what I do at all. There are no angry dogs as far as I'm concerned. Nobody gets to be angry around me. If you're round a corner and you're surprised and you want to growl or bark, fine. You have about 30 seconds to do that, after which I had better not hear you growl or bark at me, and especially not at Frida. Under no circumstances is that allowed for any canine, domestic or otherwise. But that won't work for you. That won't help you any. If you're dealing with an angry dog who's off a leash, then follow the standard advice that game wardens will give you. Don't make eye contact, don't raise your voice, don't panic the dog, don't do anything the dog could see as a challenge, that sort of thing. And that if the dog seems angry enough to attack, what you want to do is seek high ground. Try to get up on the roof of a car or up on a steep rock that is harder for them to scale than for you to scale. Take advantage of the fact that you have thumbs. Take advantage of the fact that your biology has been evolutionarily evolved for climbing. Get up off the ground. Because the last thing you want to do is face an angry dog on level ground. They will win, and it could get ugly. So try to get up off the ground. I always, the advice to people is always, in an urban setting, is always get up on a car. You'd be at least minimally safer up on a car. I think I remember you saying in an old video that of all the different nationalities and people you've met around the world, Russians are the most literary and well-read. Well, I don't know about well-read anymore. Young people don't read, but they're certainly the most literary. If you had their kind of literary history, wouldn't you be? It's kind of unfair to the rest of us. Did you encounter any reservation in the well-read Russians you met when the topic of literature came up? And were books a taboo subject at all? No. Maybe that's a silly question. I'm just thinking of the prevalence of censorship in Russia in the last century. There were times when I was in parties and also in restaurants in Soviet Russia when you could be certain that at least one person in the room was paid by the government to listen to the other people in the room. You could be almost certain of that. And yet, the only time the room ever did totally relax is when literature came up. And I got the distinct impression, I never confirmed this, but I got the distinct impression that when the discussion turned to literature, if there was a state informer in the room, they just stopped being an informer and just started giving their opinions about literature, about poetry and great novels. I don't think that was considered fair game for them. I think, but I can't confirm that. But one way or another, I never encountered any reservation on the part of a Russian to talk about literature. No. Parzival says, "Did you enjoy The Shining? Film is better, in my personal opinion." Well, the film is better, but I didn't enjoy either one of them all that much. The book I thought was insufferable. The movie is insufferable too, but it's a little bit less insufferable. Lulu Bobble says, "Congratulations on 11K. What is your opinion of Duck's Newbury Report? I liked it. Comparable to the dreaded Infinite Jest? No, it's not. They are both what is loosely called a maximalist novel, in that they include everything but the kitchen sink. A maximalist novel is the book world's highfalutin way of referring to a novel in which the editor pocketed their annual fee but didn't do their job. But in the case of the crucial difference between the two is that Infinite Jest is arrogant. It's a maximalist, unedited novel full of drivel that is 100% sure that it's the greatest thing ever written. And Duck's Newbury Report is not. It doesn't have that attitude towards it at all. It doesn't. That attitude is on every page of Infinite Jest, and it doesn't come anywhere near Duck's Newbury Report. So that I was able to enjoy the maximalist uncontrolledness of it with a lot less attitude of my own. Peter Esposito says, "Do you think there's anything one should think about differently when reading a work they know to be incomplete? For example, should we even think about authorial intent for something like the Canterbury Tales when we know they're far from finished? Or is a novel like Natochka Nezvanova, that, well, I don't think I know that book, that was intentionally not completed, a lesser work because it starts plot threads and doesn't finish them? Well, an incomplete work is necessarily a lesser work than a complete work, no matter what anybody in the 21st century might say. That's necessarily true. That's one of the kinds of A to B to C straight undeniable logic that the 21st century hates. But it's nevertheless true. They don't like 2 plus 2 is 4. They don't like men are biologically different from women. And they don't, an obvious statement like a complete novel is superior to an incomplete novel, they're not going to like at all, even though there's no way around it. It's just A to B to C logic. But in terms of reading something critically, knowing that it's incomplete, the only thing that you would be limited there would be not knowing what the whole work would look like. Authorial intent only goes so far. When you're reading a book like Edwin Drood or the Canterbury Tales, you might have an idea of how the author was going to finish it, but you can only deal with what you have right in front of you, and not worry about the rest of it. So I hope that answers the question. I'm not sure if it does. Tomorrow's Classic says, number 1, during the UK lockdown, I found myself reading more Jules Verne and Edgar Rice Burroughs. They won't let you down. Get used to their rhythm of writing and they won't let you down. I've run out of Tarzan for now, and I'm now reading Key Gore. Oh my, you do have it bad. But your lockdown's been lifted. Since you wrote this question, your lockdown's been lifted, right? So you can go to the bar. You can go to the local pub and get smashed. And if you read Key Gore, you're going to want to do that. So, something about now and something about the old jungle pulps just make them such fun reads in stressful times. Are there any other authors or genres you go to for guaranteed fun reading? Well, you've named a bunch that I do. And I might also point out, I don't know how easy it'd be for you to do, since a lot of them are falling apart or collector's items, but the old DC Comics run of Tarzan, the comic book, drawn by Joe Kubert, if you can find, maybe on eBay, you can find a big collection of those that's fairly cheap. They make wonderful Tarzan adjacent reading. They really, really do. So you could add that to it. Number 2, I enjoyed your read-along of one of the John Carter books a while back. Now that the Paperback Junkie is back, is there any chance of a similar pulp read-along? I'd love to do a pulp read-along with the Paperback Junkie. And number 3, have you ever met a Newfoundland dog? Yes. Many, many, many times I have met Newfoundlands. They are wonderful. Newfies are great. They are fantastic. Pure souls. Just every one of them. There was one in particular years and years ago. I think I told this story on this channel years ago. At the time, I had 2 beagles who were a little old and a little crotchety. They really weren't interested in other dogs at all. They weren't ever all that interested in other dogs. And there was a field that we went to, an open field, that a lot of other dog people went to. And one person had a Newfie that went to that field and used to love me. He realized pretty early on that he wasn't going to get anything like affection or even interest from my boys, but he used to love me. And he used to charge at me, this thing that was gigantic. He used to charge at me from across the field. His owners used to say, is it okay that he's charging you like this? I would say, yes, absolutely, absolutely. Just total smoochies. It was wonderful. Martha Kennedy Lindley says, how are we doing for time? Oh no, we're off. All right, we're gonna start with Martha next.